So let's talk about some of the strongest and most powerful units in all of 40k, going through each and every faction in turn. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're going to be quite broad reaching, and I'm going to run through some of my opinions on some of the strongest units in each faction in the game. Now I'll be honest, I know that this is just going to be one opinion on this, though I have tried to be led by what sort of units people tend to include in tournament winning lists quite a lot. There are quite a lot of factors that actually make a unit good, whether it's super durable and can hold lots of objectives, provides amazing buffs, or can just do monumental damage and is hard to get rid of for the enemy army. In this video I'm going to share what I think are some of the strongest units for every single faction, but if you think there's anything else that deserves the crown in each army, then feel free to let me know down in the comments below. But for the meantime, let's jump straight into it, starting with the Space Marines. So no surprises for the top of the list, I've chosen to put Eradicators in the top spot for Space Marines. We all know what they do by now, put out far too many melter shots for their points, while still managing to be really quite durable. Another one that I was tempted by was the Relic Contemptor Dreadnought. That thing fills a very similar anti-tank niche, while also being incredibly survivable and very long ranged as well. I strongly suspect that will be getting a big hit with the nerf bat when the Forge World Index drops. For Blood Angels unique units, we have Sanguinary Guard. I made a video about them yesterday, just explaining why I think they're so good in 9th and might be one of the game's best close combat units. 30-point models, up to 5, strength 5, AP-3, damage 2 attacks on the charge, with Blood Angels +1 to wound, and a few other really nice benefits. I think a few of these are rarely going to be a wrong choice in a Blood Angels army. Anything without an invul save will get cut down in short order. For Dark Angels, I feel that the Deathwing are at the top of the tree at the moment. Terminators in themselves got a massive buff by going to 3 wounds and didn't really pay all that many points for the privilege. Deathwing and Deathwing Knights though are only ever wounded on a 4+, basically giving them transhuman physiology but on all the time. So if you want some cheap hybrid shooty and melee Terminators, I'd go with the standard Deathwing, and if you wanted a dedicated melee force that's incredibly hard to shift with Storm Shields, then go with the Deathwing Knights. Hitting on 2s with a Thunderhammer profile that doesn't give you a -1 to hit, it's just one added bonus. For the Space Wars, I've chosen the Thunderwolf Cavalry. They've had a whole ton of buffs from their new codex, getting advance and charge, and extra wound, and additional buffs to their chainswords and power weapons. I feel like they're going to be the go-to choice to zoom straight up the board and tear the enemy to bits with power weapons and Thunderhammers. I was quite tempted by Bjorn the Fell-Handed as a choice as well. He too has done very nicely out of the new decks, picking up Duty Eternal and actually going down in points. He also retains his reroll aura, and is no less fighty than he was before. He can even use Duty Eternal to give everyone around him reroll 1s to hit and wound, which is quite a significant force multiplier. Next we have the Death Watch, and my favourites here are the standard veteran team and the new Proteus style kill team, basically the updated rules for the mixed veteran kill team. I feel like special issue ammunition is pretty much the primary reason to play Death Watch, and while the Primaris kill teams are interesting, I still feel that they're not quite on the same level as the mixed kill team Death Watch veterans, who are really very flexible, with cheaper power weapons, and very flexible special issue ammunition fire. Finally, for Grey Knights we have Paladins. They're perhaps having a little bit more competition for their role compared with the standard Terminators now, but with Grey Knights and their multiple stacking buffs on one unit, you can really make a unit of Paladins or two into an enormous Death Star unit that can blow away enemies both in the shooting phase and in combat. They're really durable with 3 wounds apiece, and the ability to get -1 damage on them, so multi-damage weapons just aren't as effective. I was also quite tempted by Drago and the Grandmaster Nemesis Dreadknight, both of whom are excellent little fighting and buffing threats. Stepping away from Space Marines now into the other Imperial armies. For the Imperial Guard, I've chosen the Demolisher Tank Commander, who sticks out very highly indeed in terms of just being a really efficient anti-tank choice. A good roll with one of these guys can easily blow away an enemy tank in one shot, and you can spend 2 command points to give him maximum 12 shots against one enemy vehicle. Decently costed at the moment, I think. Another really solid option is a Manticore with a full payload missile upgrade. Following the nerfs to Space Marine artillery, I think that this is one of the stronger ignores line of sight weapons in the game, and you can take a custom regiment to reroll the number of shots it gets, so you should be able to drop some very hefty missile death on the unit that's most troubling you. Not a lot's going to be arguing with a good 8 or 9 strength 10 shots, all at damage 3. For the Sisters of Battle, I think that they have numerous very decently balanced units, but the zealots that stick out the most to me are the Sisters Repentia. I think a few big units of these loaded up in rhinos is a really solid choice, particularly in the Order of the Bloody Rose, where they'll pretty much delete anything that they can get their hands on. You can also think about using Strategic Reserve for them, and using Miracle Dice to pretty much guarantee a charge. giving you a cheap but ludicrously dangerous melee threat that will make your opponent very nervous until it's actually deployed on the board. For the Imperial Knights, I still think that the Crusader is probably the strongest pick. Knights stomp your feet are always decent in melee in the first place, so having an extra gun for not all that much additional points cost is usually the best way to go in my opinion, and a few Crusaders with Ironstorm missile pods will provide a very decent barrage of firepower as the Knights move up to take the midfield. For Adeptus Mechanicus, I think that their army is really quite well balanced, with quite a lot of decent options to choose from, and I've actually decided to put the Cerberus Raiders, the very cheap light melee screening cavalry, as the top pick, just because of the amazing board control that they can take up. Being able to move before the game starts, potentially snipe some characters turn 1, and having that excellent and very annoying stratagem to run away when they're charged means that they can be an absolute menace to disrupt the enemy army. They're rarely going to do all that much damage, though they can put in a bit of work against light infantry, but just for being a complete nuisance, fairly durable if they are targeted, screening the army and contesting objectives, I think most competitive AdMech lists will want a unit or two of these. My runner-up is Data Horde Cataphron Breachers, the ones that get extra hits with the arc rifles when they roll 5 or 6 to hit. They're cheap, decently durable and have OBSEC, and even have some melee as well, so are good units to maintain the battle line while your damage dealers get to work. For the Adeptus Custodes, I did have some trouble with these guys again. They don't have all that many units, but a lot of them are very usable and kind of are all fairly essential parts to the army. I decided to choose the Alarus Custodian Terminators as the winners. They did quite well out of the points changes, and there's quite a lot of decent options and stratagems that you can use from them from their Psychic Awakening update. A big unit of them can potentially be very tough, and then you can use the stratagem to break them up into individual units, go all over the place, and really cause a big nuisance in the opponent's army, not to mention that they all get OBSEC as well, due to the Adeptus Custodes army rules. Other solid choices are the Caladius Grav Tank for some good all-round general purpose firepower, and Custodian Guard, who have really come into their own in 9th edition, being able to slowly march towards objectives and being a pain to scrape off. Finally, for the Agents of the Inquisition, I've decided to go for Inquisitor Kotias. I'll be honest, I'm not convinced that any of the Inquisitors are massively strong right now, but he gives you 2 casts of their useful psychic powers, fairly decent melee and toughness, and if you take him alongside some Acolytes, can potentially do some nice intercept fire. Let's move on to the Forces of Chaos now. And again for Chaos Space Marines, I did have a bit of trouble here. I feel like a lot of the strength of the Chaos Codex comes from stacking multiple buffs on certain powerful units, whether those damage dealing units are things like Obliterators, Noise Marines, or other various big nasties. I've decided to go for Obliterators for the top spots, which I think can be incredibly scary if you do put the right amount of investment into them. For example, if you run them as Alpha Legion, you can redeploy them before the game to ensure that they're going to get a decent strike on the enemy. You can also pre-game move them to get their weapons in range, and if you make them Slanesh, you can get them to shoot twice at +1 to wound with Endless Cacophony and Veterans of the Long War. A whole ton of command points invested here, but there's very little that's not going to make a massive dent in. You can then think about protecting them from enemy fire as well. You can use Conceal on them the next turn, which will mean unless the enemy's right next to them, they won't even be able to shoot them back, so you can do the same thing next turn. Some other units I was strongly considering picking for the top spot for Chaos are the Defiler, which has massively improved this edition in terms of points, Hellforge Contemptor Dreadnoughts just as some very efficient firepower, and perhaps Abaddon the Despoiler himself, who provides some very helpful buffing rerolls if you're going Black Legion, as well as being an absolute beast in melee where he can tangle with most anything in the game. For Death Guard, I've gone for the Mephitic Blight Hauler, which I think is going to see a bit of an uptick in the amount that it's played now that multi-melters get 2 shots. These things were already looking very solid in 9th edition anyway, going down in points where the 9th edition rules really work out for them quite well. They're very tough, now pack quite a hefty amount of anti-tank firepower, and are also not too bad against infantry with those plague spurts and their combat abilities. I think a squadron or 2 of these is usually going to cause a bit of a problem for the opponent, and if they do want to get rid of them, they're going to have to dedicate a whole ton of extra firepower. Other units I was tempted by were the Foul Blight Spawn, with his amazing flamer to be able to make enemies go away, and the Plague Burst Crawler as another very powerful demon engine. Moving on to the Thousand Sons, I've chosen Araman, who I'd argue is pretty much the best psyker that they have point for point. Thousand Sons is going to be relying on its spells, and you want the best caster around if you have them. Even at his slightly higher points cost, I think he is going to be appearing in most lists. With the rules from Ritual of the Damned, Rubric Marines are my runners-up. A lot of decent synergies do revolve around them, and as they're a decently powerful troops choice, I think they'll also appear in most Thousand Sons lists, and I think they could get very interesting indeed when they get 2 wounds. For Chaos Demons, I've chosen Nurglings as the winners. pretty much the premier chaos unit for stealing objectives under people's noses. The combination of being very durable against near any firepower and being able to forward deploy is just really nice. Whether you shoot anti-infantry or anti-tank weapons at them, you're going to be dedicating quite a lot of firepower if you want to scoop up these bases. All the while the demon army can be running around doing other things, and until they're gone, they'll pretty much rule midfield objectives. Other solid ones are the Exalted Lord of Change, who can have -1 damage with a Warlord trait, and then get your choice of buffs from the pick of the Exalted Greater Demon table. He also can really help to punish castle lists with the very powerful and scary Infernal Gateway spell to throw mortal wounds all over the place. And I've seen quite a few lists running lots of Beasts of Nurgle as well. Again, much like a lot of Nurgle, they're not going away unless you dedicate ludicrous amounts of firepower to them, and they will tend to grind down enemies in close combat as well. Finally, for the forces of the Chaos Knights, I've chosen the Knight Despoiler with dual thermal cannons, which I'd ideally want to run in their Iconoclast devotion. Dual thermal cannons are going to make mincemeat of enemy heavies as it moves up, and then he can fight just about as well as most melee knights as well, as the Iconoclast buffs on the charge really work absolute wonders with Titanic feet, making him very nearly as scary in close combat as an Imperial Knight Gallant. Finally, let's move on to some Xenos, starting with the Craftworld Eldar. The forces of the Craftworlds have been struggling a bit in 9th edition, though I've decided to give my pick for strongest unit to be quite a niche one. The Wraithseer is basically a buffed up HQ Warlord with 12 wounds and toughness 8 and a 5+ invul save. He can mount a D-cannon that can target units out of line of sight, and with a Warlord trait, that D-cannon can target characters freely as well, allowing you just to have a very tough and durable sniper in the middle of the board who can just blitz away at enemy characters with no issues. Combine that with expert crafters and the one that allows you to reroll wands with wraith units, and you have an incredibly potent sniper who's very tough to enemy fire and can deal a decent amount of damage when he does get into close combat. For the Drukhari, I've chosen the Humble Venom, though I'll admit I was somewhat tempted by Grotesques and some of the other Homunculi Coven units. I think it'll be quite rare that you'll see a Dark Eldar list without a Venom or two in it. Despite their points hikes going into the new edition, they remain a very annoying and very fast unit to remove. -1 to hit, a 5+ invul, and sometimes a feel no pain from Blackheart just makes them surprisingly durable for a toughness 5 gunboat. They're not quite sufficient in terms of damage dealing anymore, but in 9th edition jumping onto objectives with troops is just so important, and I think that the Venom will continue to fill this role admirably. The Harlequins are now one of the scariest armies in 9th competitively, and a lot of their very meagre unit pool are very good. The ones that would concern me most are still those Skyweaver jet bikes. They'll shred your tanks with Haywire, shred your heavy infantry with those Zephyrglaives, have ridiculous movement, and they can even charge an enemy unit, then use the stratagem to jump back straight out of close combat again, so your opponent can't even hit you back. Very nasty, and I'm sure they'd be an absolute priority to remove just as soon as you can. Otherwise, Shadowseers, Fusion Troops, and Death Jesters are all very scary in the Harlequin army. I particularly don't like the Shadowseer ability to make units appear 6 inches further away to get out of range of a lot of small arms. And a Harlequin troop in a Starweaver equipped with a bunch of fusion pistols can really put the hurt on near enough any heavy target. Moving on to the Hive Mind, Tyranid Hive Guard are my choice for the bugs. Decently efficient ignores line of sight firepower that can deal with Space Marines fairly well is pretty good to have in 9th edition, particularly with all this obscuring terrain going on. They are a bit of an investment, but they are certainly a unit that screams out to be dealt with unless you want the most important thing in your army getting shot up each turn. Otherwise, I think the Rippers are a really good choice for capturing objectives, very cheap and very efficient, and in terms of backfield fire support, Exocrines are looking pretty nice as well, really not too bad firepower point for point. For the forces of the Genestealer cult, I really wouldn't have seen myself saying this in 8th edition, but I think that the Achilles Ridge Runner might be one of the strongest units in the Codex now. With their ballistic skill 4+, they gained a ton from being able to move and shoot, and heavy mining lasers combined with the Jackal Alphas hitting on 3s means that they're fairly efficient anti-tank. They're fairly fast and fairly durable point for point as it goes. In terms of hefty damage dealing, I think the Acolyte Hybrids are probably the best way to go right now. There's still a massive amount of power in just being able to drop in and delete whatever you want with Rending Claws and Rock Saws, even if they get shot up quite easily in return. For the Orcs, this was another faction that I was struggling to differentiate between. A lot of their units are decently good and usable in their own different ways. I decided to go for the Megatrak Scrapjet in the end, just as it's so much decently improved in 9th edition, particularly with Death Skulls for rerolls on all of those attacks. Very fast, allowing you to get better positioning compared with the enemy, a decent amount of anti-heavy firepower that's all damage 3 to help deal with Gravis Marines, and the ability to fight twice with Strength 8 nose drills in close combat is really quite nice with the Corkscrew custom job. As I said though, there are plenty of other units that I really could have justified putting first, Basic boys might not be quite as threatening as in 8th edition, but using that jump across the board and getting them in close combat and gumming up objectives is still great. Smasher guns are still a bit undercosted for the amount of damage that they can put out and their good durability, and Ghazghkull Thraka himself can still make himself a big problem to deal with while wrecking near enough anything in close combat. For Necrons, I couldn't really see myself putting anything else other than the Catan Shard of the Nightbringer. Feel free to check out my video about him after this if you're interested, but this guy is an absolute monster. He'll typically take at least 4 phases to bring him down due to his living metal regenerating wounds, so if you're trying to kill him by shooting, that's basically not going to happen all game long. He'll throw out mortal wounds with his Gaze of Death and Catan powers, and is particularly good at deleting characters with this, and in melee he's decent both versus hordes and versus heavies, with his Entropic Strike ignoring anything like Feel No Pain and also ignoring invul saves. There's barely a target in the game that he won't go through in a single round of close combat. I was pretty much debating between the Riptide with the Amplified Ion Accelerator and the Cold Star Commander. I think both of them are very strong in their different ways. The Amplified Ion Accelerator is an upgrade from the Greater Good Psychic Awakening book. It just basically puts the Ion Accelerator through the roof, averaging 5 damage for every hit that you get through, and also having automatic 6 shots. If you need to make tanks go away in a hurry at long range, then look no further than this. Cold Star Commanders are still a really interesting choice. Their enormous movement and decent firepower means that a good player with decent positioning will get a lot out of them. They can potentially jump around safely for a few turns on your own deployment zone, and then maybe go and kamikaze something important late in the game, surprising the opponent to fusion blaster a character to death, or maybe fly right into the enemy's backfield to take out an important unit that thought they were safe. I really like the flexible and powerful movement that these guys have. So let me know what you think of these choices down in the comments below. Are there any units that you think will be more deserving of the crown for your given army, or anything that you're particularly scared about when you're fighting a certain force? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more like this. And if you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I have a Patreon page which can be found down in the video description below. Making all these YouTube vids does take quite a lot of time, so if you are enjoying them regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel Patreons get to see certain videos early, there's regular votes on what sort of things come next on the channel, and you also get automatically entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway, which happens once a month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.